My name is SARIT Bernhard, and I'm in remission from stage 3 HER2 positive breast cancer. I'm also the mother of 3 daughters and an HR professional in the tech industry. So I was diagnosed with breast cancer in November of 2020. So right in the kind of heart of the pandemic. And at the time, I had just turned 40 and had my first mammogram and found out I could tell things were not good because they rushed things along and then gave me the diagnosis actually on election night. So we were watching the election and then I got the call about breast cancer and suddenly everything flipped, turned on a dime and suddenly we were really focused on just our household and our family and not the world. And it was a pretty intense time, as everyone knows. And then we added this in the mix. My treatment plan was neoadjuvant chemotherapy, meaning that I was prescribed chemotherapy first and then surgery and then radiation. It was 6 rounds of chemotherapy. It was one every 3 weeks for the 6 rounds. And then during which lots of monitoring and blood tests, and it was pretty intense experience, followed by a break. I wrapped that up on March 15th, I remember. And then 3 weeks later on April 7th, I had surgery. And I ended up having, I decided to have a lumpectomy. At the time. It was a very extensive lump. It's called a segmental mastectomy because they took about half of my breast, um, which um, which was supposed to be one of 2 surgeries back to back. That was the first one to just get out the whole cancer field and actually see how I responded to the chemotherapy. And then the second follow-up surgery I was supposed to have was going to actually be the full mastectomy on the right side. But I was unbelievably lucky in that I had a complete response, a total response from the chemotherapy. And so at the time, they also took out 9 lymph nodes, I should say, in the first surgery, from my axillary, which is your armpit. And at the time, it was pretty painful recovery for me. I opted to pause and then complete my radiation, which was 5 weeks of radiation that wrapped up in July. Um, and then from there, I had to continue with another several months of the Herceptin and Perjeta, because if you have HER2 positive, you continue for a full year of the treatment. And then that wrapped up on around November 20th, 21st, I think, of 2021. And then at that point, you just finish treatment and, and you hope it doesn't return, which was terrifying. But everything has been really good and great. In terms of my health, and I'm very vigilant about having all of my scans every 6 months and paying attention to every single thing that happens in my body and not being afraid to advocate for myself if something feels off. Um, I also last week I went through with a double mastectomy and reconstruction, um, a tram flap, a muscle sparing tram flap reconstruction, and lymph node transfer to my right arm because I did have some lymphedema from the lymph nodes being removed from the first surgery. And so I finally just decided if I'm doing some of the surgery, I'm just gonna do it all. If you asked me last week if it was the right decision, I would have said, no, what did I do? This is such a hard recovery, but this week is much better. And, and I do feel like this was the right decision for me, but every decision along this way is so personal and so unique to the individual that I think, it has to be what you decide when you decide it for it to feel like it's the right, course of action for you. I think my lowest moment in this, I may have a couple ties. I may have a tie, I should say, but I think partway through chemo, I was feeling so physically just bad, like run down. And, um, the physical nature of just not being able to do stuff was really impacting my emotional and mental state. Um, and, you're doing all of this without any understanding of whether it's actually gonna work, and so I think that's a really hard thing is you're kinda doing this and you're making every decision you can with, like, what information is right in front of you, to make the best decision, but you don't know what the outcome is gonna be, and so it's pretty terrifying all the way through. I will say a wise woman gave me advice that, like, the hardest point were the first 3 weeks before you start chemotherapy just because or treatment because you kind of feel so helpless and you don't know, and so once I started it, I definitely felt like I had a feeling of, like, I'm fighting back, I'm doing something, I'm really trying to take control of this as best as you can, and so that was incredibly helpful, but then I remember at one point during chemo, I was feeling so bad, and I was just pretty scared, and you feel very lonely, like, even when I had people around me who I knew loved me, and I was so, to be honest, so grateful it was happening to me, and I wasn't watching them because I think that's an incredibly powerless feeling for people around you to watch what's happening, and so I had a weird gratitude for that it was me and not, God forbid, my children or my husband or my parents or my brother but, it was really lonely, and I remember feeling really just down and thinking about how I felt so badly for people who don't have support around them and are going through this, and don't have the ability to advocate for themselves and are going through this. So I have so much gratitude for my community. My husband is, uh, you know, maybe cliche, but he's my best friend. He's awesome. He and I are great partners. And so he is definitely, you know, one of the biggest parts of my community and my 3 children. Even though when I was diagnosed, my youngest was 4, maybe just 5. She just turned 5, and then my oldest was, um, 9, I think, 9 or yeah, she was 9 years old, and then my middle was 7, so they were pretty young, but they were also a huge part of my community in terms of just keeping it real, like, no matter what was going on for me, they still needed their breakfast, lunch, and dinner and still needed to, like, cuddle time and movie time and fun stuff, and so it helps ground you, and pull you out of your funk. Um, and then my parents are unbelievable. My mom moved out to California for 7 months to help take care of, really to help take care of, well, the kids and, like, supplement what I couldn't do, since we were all home and, my husband was working full time, and my dad would fly back and forth, and they were unbelievable. Um, and then my brother and my, sister-in-law and my husband's siblings and my in-laws and my husband's side of the family, really amazing when I had to shave my head during chemo, which was, it was hard. I'm not particularly vain, as you can tell by the way I look on this interview, but, well, hopefully you can tell that, but I don't wear a lot of makeup and don't spend a ton of time on my hair is what I should say. But, when I had to shave my head, that was still really hard. My younger brother got to shave my head. It was kind of maybe cathartic for him after all the torture for so many years, but so he and the kids, I let the kids participate in shaving my head as kind of a one-time thing to make it sort of an event. But that was really hard. But then my husband's, my mother-in-law and, aunt, and one of my husband's aunts and, an uncle and, um, his brother all shaved their heads also. They didn't tell me they were doing it. And so I remember even now it chokes me up, but it was like such a unbelievably, you know, massive gesture of support and it was really incredible. And so, and then, friends were unbelievably helpful in every way that they could and people reaching out and people letting me know that they knew someone and putting me in touch with people who had been through it. And then I also actually joined an online support group for younger women who were going through it. And that was unbelievably helpful as a resource for just answering questions and even when the doctors would say, "Well, it's not really, something that we see or a side effect," and then I would go check the support group, and like 10 people would come back and say, "Yeah, that's exactly what I went through," and so it just helped. So I think this has made me. It certainly made me a more interesting person. I think I appreciate things more and differently than I did before. Um, and I also think that I take things very seriously still, but I think I also have a way of putting them in context of letting them, not holding on to things as long, or finding a way to sort of process it and almost compartmentalize it and put it somewhere without it like, becoming bigger than it should become, which I think I used to have before going into this, but I always have something to compare it to. I would say advocate for yourself. I think it's incredibly important, no matter how good the medical system or the insurance that you have is, or otherwise, you have to still be a very active advocate for yourself. And it's incredibly important because you have to ask questions and you have to let people know if something doesn't feel right. And you have to pay attention to your body and make sure that you make space and time for it because, no one else can and will. No matter how wonderful your community is and your network is, you are the one who really has to advocate for what you need and what you want. Use every resource you have available to you and, all of your strengths. And if you don't have something that you think you need, try to source it around you to make sure that you have that and you can equip yourself with equip or arm yourself with every possible resource you have and find an outlet that helps you, emotionally and mentally as much as physically. For me, being outside was a huge piece of it. I was outside as much as I possibly could be because I just needed to be outside in the world a little bit and not just in my bubble. Fight like hell.